HRBC show called Let's Talk. So today we have the honor of having Mr. David Mick, who is running for Commonwealth's attorney in Chesapeake. So hi, Mr. Mick.
How you doing?
I'm good. Would you like to tell us a little about yourself?
Well, yeah, a little bit about me. I grew up in Hampton Roads. I lived in Portsmouth growing up my whole life until I went off to college. I went to Christopher Newport in college, and then I went to a small law school in Pennsylvania. And then I came back, and I've lived in Hampton Roads ever since. A little bit about my career. I've practiced criminal law for over uh, 17 years. I started out as a public defender in Norfolk in 2008. And then in 2014, I came to Chesapeake to prosecute, and I was promoted to Deputy Commonwealth's Attorney, where I supervised a team of lawyers. And then in 2022, I went to work for Jason Miaris at the Attorney General's office, where I did criminal litigation. I did a lot of appellate work. I did work in the Supreme Court of Virginia. I also did writs of actual innocence, cold case assistance throughout the state of Virginia, and special investigations. And now I'm running for Commonwealth's attorney.
Okay. So I have a few questions for you. Are you ready?
I'm ready.
Okay. So what made you want to run for this position?
Well, first, I just have to say, I think there's a need for more effective leadership in our Commonwealth's Attorney's Office. So a little bit about me is growing up, my family was all about service, whether it be volunteering, selling packs at bingo for charity, whether it was volunteering to cut the grass at the baseball field, whatever it was, we wanted to volunteer. But one of the important things that my family said was, you also need to find where you can help, where you are needed. It's not good enough to just say you're helping when you're not really helping. And what I mean by that is like, for example, I used to do a lot of marathon running. I don't do it much anymore. I could blame my kids, but it's not their fault. I just haven't been very diligent about running. But, before the Boston Marathon bombings happened, I was in very good shape, and a legally blind runner asked if I would run with him, and I would, and I said I would. And then the Boston Marathon bombing happened. We were about a quarter mile from the finish line, and it was a pretty traumatic event for all parties involved. But that led me to realize what my dad always said was true, where you have to be able to get into you have to help. You need to serve your community, but you have to do it in a way where you can benefit them. Now, what benefit would have it been if I didn't know how to run a marathon and I couldn't have done what I needed to do at that time to help my legally blind runner get back to his family? So, that's what I look at this job. I never wanted to be a politician. I don't, like the idea of that, but I'm a prosecutor. And when I see a need in this city to have a better Commonwealth's attorney, I'm going to do what I can to make that happen, because I think our community needs it. The reality is the Commonwealth's Attorney's Office has a large amount of power in the city. And that's why I think it needs to be done by somebody like me, who has the experience that I had, who has tried, who's convicted child predators in the city, who's convicted murderers in the city, who's dealt with victims constantly. I've handled over 1,000 criminal cases, from simple misdemeanors to first-degree murder. I've also done lots of outreach as a prosecutor, and I think that's what we need. And just like I said, I see a need in our community. I have the ability to fill it properly, and that's what I'm going to do, because I think my city needs it.
Okay. All right. Now, what is the role of the Commonwealth's attorney? Like, what do y'all do?
So that's a question I get a lot when I'm outdoor knocking. Hey, what is the Commonwealth's attorney? Well, in Virginia, we're a Commonwealth. So we are basically the same as what other cities and states call their district attorneys. So under the Code of Virginia, we are charged with essentially prosecuting all the felonies, indictments, and certain misdemeanors in the city that you're elected. So for Chesapeake, it would be to prosecute those. You also deal with asset forfeiture stuff sometimes, and then you have to represent certain Commonwealth appeals in the appellate world. But for the most part, your duty is to prosecute felonies and other misdemeanors. I think in addition to that, the prosecutor's role should also be a member and an active participant with community members. Because one of your roles, if you're prosecuting, I think it's not demanded by statute, but you should also work on preventing crime. Because if you're charged with prosecuting crimes, you're charged essentially with making the community safe and holding people accountable. But you can also help make the community safe by trying to prevent crime and trying to intervene before crimes happen. This idea of making victims whole, I'm all about that, and I believe that. But the reality is, if you talk to any victim, they are never made whole after that victimization happens. The first time a gun pulled on me in Portsmouth, I was probably 13 years old. I was walking through the parking lot of Power Auditorium, which is a bingo hall. And I remember that forever. And that's what victims remember. And that's what we need to remember is the best way to help victims is to try to do things that make them not victims in the first place.
Okay. All right. So your site says you would expand community outreach and build community partnerships to prevent crime and reduce recidivism rates. What do you mean by this, and how will you accomplish this?
So one of the things I did when I was in the Commonwealth Attorney's Office from 2014 until the end of 2021 was I was an active participant in our community outreach. And we did several things. We did a basketball tournament every year in South Norfolk. We did a Boys and Girls Conference every year at Oscar Smith. We did something called Travel on the Road to Success, where we would go to rec centers in the summer and provide structured programming to give them skills to succeed later in life. So what I mean about community outreach is several things. First of all, I would be elected by the people. So it's not fair to me to just show up 100 days outside of an election to say, hey, I'm here, I'm a part of this community. To really prevent crime and create real partnerships and trust with the community, you got to keep showing up. And that's really what kids need. They need you to show up. I can't tell you how many times, we'd be on the baseball field and some politician would show up at opening day and then we'd never see him again. But the politician that showed up every once in a while and checked out a game that wasn't, opening day where there was a lot of people, that's the ones that mattered to us. And I think when we look at every city, every community, we see crimes being committed by younger and younger people. And I think the problem is, as a community, we need to do better at mentoring our young people. And the person that needs to do that most is the person who is charged with prosecuting these people and the person that is charged with keeping the community safe. Studies show all the time that if kids can read, they are much less likely to commit crimes. So why aren't we partnering with community programs and libraries and teaching kids to read and getting them books at home? Even small things. I have a little free library out in my front yard, and we have kids' books in them because I just want to encourage kids to read. The other thing we can do is we have to make sure that it is a total buy-in by everybody. But if people see leadership, like your Commonwealth's attorney who is charged with keeping us safe, not participating in these community outreach initiatives to have kids stay out of trouble, give them different pathways than following gangs, give them learning environments where they can succeed, then the community is not going to buy in. Because why would they buy in if the people that are, almost employed to do that aren't doing it? So that's what I mean. I want to expand it. I also want to be more accessible. People don't realize this, but if you're in South Norfolk and you want to come to the Commonwealth Attorney's Office in Great Bridge, it's an hour and a half round trip. If you live in Western Branch, it could take you 2 hours depending on what traffic's like. So our Commissioner of Revenue's offices and our Treasurer's office, they have offices in local libraries. I want to create an environment where we can be accessible all over the city so people don't have to drive to one location. Now, can I do that every day? No, but I can set up times where, hey, we're going to be here at this time. And if you're a victim and you can't make it down to the courthouse, we will create an environment where we can come to you, because I think that's what our city needs. I think that's what people want their elected officials to do. And that's what I will do as Commonwealth's attorney. And I will make sure that we are participating in violence interrupter programs. Our police department does a great job doing that. But I think our Commonwealth's attorney, as a law enforcement arm, needs to also be a part of that.
Okay. Now, the victims of violent crimes feel like they aren't included or considered in seeking justice seeking justice and the process of seeking justice. How can you change that?
Well, I think sometimes they feel that way because they aren't included. I mean, that's a reality that people need to understand, is sometimes they aren't included. And we do have a crime victim and witness rights statute. But for me, and that's 19.2-11.01. But to me, that's the bare minimum. Okay. I think we need to do more than that. And, it has a lot of things like, well, if the victim, says in writing that they want to be included in certain things, and you got to include them. If a victim calls me and says they want to know about everything, that's enough for me. I'm not going to make them put it in writing, And what we also have to understand, and when I was supervising attorneys, I tried to make sure they understood this one principle, and it's this. For us, we go to court every day. For police officers, they go to court quite a bit. But for victims and even defendants, that case, and it might be one of 100 on the docket that day, but that case for those two people and those witnesses might be the most important thing that has ever happened to them. And we should treat it as such. We shouldn't treat it as any run-of-the-mill case. They should all be treated as if they are the most important things that are happening to the parties, because usually they are. And I would tell my prosecutors, I said, if you lose that mindset, you need to go find something else to do, because you will not be doing this job correctly if you lose that mindset. If you treat cases like, oh, it's just another larceny, it's just another, assault or something like that, you got to find something else to do. And, I think what we need to do is that's another way that outreach helps with victims feeling more included. The reality is victims are scared, they're afraid. And we expect them to come to court and tell their story to me, who's a complete stranger to them. The first time you meet a prosecutor or somebody in the Commonwealth's attorney's office shouldn't be when you become a victim, or when you've been charged with a crime, or when you get a subpoena on the door. We need to be more accessible to the community, and we need to be more known by the community. And if we do that, they might be more likely to open up to us and talk to us and not be afraid to tell us what they want to see happen. But it all starts with communication. You can't put that communication off on police officers or victim witness. And we have a great victim witness program in Chesapeake. It is top notch. But we can't only rely on them, because we're the ones asking the questions in court. We're the ones making the decision, and we need to communicate with our victims.
Okay. Sounds good. All right. So victims of domestic violence do not feel heard also. When they try to press charges or get a restraining order, the abuser only gets like a slap on the wrist. What are your thoughts on taking a firmer stance on this?
Well, here again, just like other victims, sometimes they aren't listened to, And, one thing that I like to say, not like to say, it's the truth. Prosecutors are unlike any other type of lawyers, because most lawyers have a duty to the client only. I mean, of course, you can't perpetrate a fraud on the court, but your duty is to your client. But when you're a prosecutor, you have a duty to the victim. You have a duty to your community. You have a duty to the court. You have a duty to the defendant, making sure he gets a just trial, a fair trial. You have all these different hats. But I think that victim hat is especially important, because the victims have nobody else. They don't have their own attorney that's only duty is for them. So we have to make sure, especially with the domestic violence victims, that we are listening to them and we are patient with them. Here's the reality with domestic violence victims. They are in such a different situation than most others, because they are always with the person that is violating them, and that comes with a lot of fear. And this fear muzzles the truth. They hide behind this veil of shame, and they hide behind being hurt by somebody that they love. And we need to understand this. So we can't be frustrated when they're reluctant to come forward, because they have a lot of other factors that they are dealing with. Like, for example, how are they going to get money if the other person's the breadwinner? Where are they going to live? What's going to happen to their kids? They have so many things that they have to worry about. And a lot of those things are because of the person charged, the person committing these crimes against them. But we have to be patient with them, and we have to really talk to them, and they have to trust us. And if we don't have that communication with domestic violence victims, they're never going to trust us. They've been told their whole lives, or the whole time they're in these abusive relationships, that nobody's going to believe you, nobody's going to fight for you, nobody's going to say anything bad about me. And they've had this happen to them over and over. And if I show up to court and I say, all right, what are we doing here? That's exactly what they think, that person is true. This person's not going to fight with me. So we have to have an environment where we can be patient with them, but we can also understand what other factors they're dealing with because of the unique situation that they're in. And we also have to hold people accountable. This whole idea about, well, it's the first time, we got to take a better look at that, because the reality is, if you talk to a lot of domestic violence victims, the first time it happens isn't the first time they call. They get to a point where they can't take it anymore, and then they finally call. And sometimes they call because they're in a life and death situation, and they might not want to go forward, and we have to work with them to do that, because they're like, I'm calling to get them to stop right now. So I don't really think I think it's a very, very rare instance where people call the first time, especially in these very abusive relationships. And if you have the training and you go to the trainings that, I would send prosecutors to, they would recognize those things. And that's what I think we have to do.
Okay. So there has been an uptick of seniors being targeted for scams lately, whether they think they're saving their grandchild from jail somewhere, to someone claiming to be able to fix something in their housing, only for the person to take their money and not fix anything. How would you help keep them educated and safer?
Well, I got to share a personal story about this, because this actually happened. My dad passed away in 2019, but shortly before he passed away, one of these scams actually happened. And I don't know how they got the information, but a lot of times, when Yahoo gets hacked or something, all your personal information gets out there. But these scams are very sophisticated. Even back in 2019, this person called my dad and was like, hey, this is the so-and-so county jail. I have, and he said my nephew's name in jail, and he needs to talk to you. And then they get this other person on, and what my dad's grandkids called him was Poppy, and all he heard when the inmate or the nephew talked was, Poppy, I need your help. Send the money for bail. And then it hung up, and then they called him back and like, yeah, we can't let you talk to him again. But it was so believable, and it might have worked against my dad, but he's like, well, it didn't work on me, because as you know, if you guys ever call me for bail, I don't have it. That's how my dad was. But that's how sophisticated they are. And how we can help seniors is with community outreach. We need to be able to tell, and that's part of crime prevention also, is to limit the amount of ability and people that they can scam. And if we can educate our seniors as to what types of scams are happening, how sophisticated they are, and what they can do to protect themselves, that also lowers crime. So crime prevention is also about educating the public so that these crimes cannot happen.
Awesome. Okay. So if elected, what are the top 3 things you hope to accomplish while in office?
Well, the first thing is being accessible and expanding outreach. I think outreach is just so important for any law enforcement agency and for any Commonwealth's attorney. I think you really have to do that. And, I've hit on most of the points already, but, outreach also helps when you're going to trial, because if people believe in you and people know you, they are more apt to cooperate. I grew up in a neighborhood where not everybody wanted to talk to the police. It wasn't a thing that some people wanted to do. They just didn't trust them. But that outreach will help people do that. So when you are trying to solve crimes and we are trying to prosecute people and hold them accountable, your witnesses are more likely to participate if they know you and they trust you. And that happens with outreach. So I will certainly expand outreach. The other thing I will do is be a voice for victims. I will make sure that victims have their that have their fighter. Like I said, we wear a lot of hats, but the victim usually only has one person fighting for them, and that is us. And I will always take that seriously, and I will always ensure that my prosecutors do that. And then the third thing is we're going to hold people accountable. You know, there's been a lot of violence happening in Chesapeake, and it seems to be every time you turn on the news, there's some kind of crime being committed with a firearm, and we are going to hold those people accountable. Now, that is what my goals are: hold people accountable, reduce crime, and be a voice for victims.
So those are all the questions that I have. Is there anything else you would like to tell the people?
Well, I would just like to tell them, you know, this race is really a job interview. And, you know, I think that's what this race comes down to. And I've said this a couple of times. It's not about who you know. It's not about, you know, who you went to school with or anything. This is a professional job. And it's unlike any other of these constitutional positions. Because if you don't like your city council person, you can go to another one. If you don't like your delegate person you're talking to, you can go to another. There's plenty of them, you know. But your Commonwealth's attorney in this city, you got one of them. And if he's not doing the job, you got to find somebody that's going to do it. And I believe I'll do that job. And I think if you look, just take this race to be a job interview and say, if I was a victim, who would I want to prosecute this case? I think it's me. I think you want the person who has handled over 1,000 criminal cases, who's prosecuted and held child predators accountable in this city, who's prosecuted and held murderers accountable in the city, somebody who's tried the jury trials, somebody who's done the outreach. And I think if you break it down to a job interview, I think I am the choice.
All righty then. Well, those are all the questions that I have, and we don't seem to have any Facebook questions. So I want to thank you so much for coming to our platform and telling us your platform.
I appreciate it.
How you want to help the city of Chesapeake. We really appreciate it.
And thank you so much for having me. Y'all's organization is doing great work.
Thank you. So I hope everyone has a great night. Bye.